Hey everyone, this is Jeff. Just gonna go ahead and get this in here. If you can just type your name in so I know who's watching, that would be great. And yeah, I'm doing it a little bit shorter tonight, just going until 7:30. But yeah, just gonna answer any questions. You were getting to see a little bit more of my office this time, which is a little bit of a mess, but figured with everything going on with the virus, like one thing that I figured I could talk about, um, just as kind of a starting point, is being backlit solely instead of having lights in front of me as a big one. But I figured I would talk about a couple things, especially at the same time. And so one of the things that say to think about when you do things synchronously is that it's not going to be the same thing as running things in a traditional classroom. Again, because you're dealing with lag, you're dealing with other factors. Sound, you don't hear sounds the same way. So when people talk over each other, it's harder to pick out where the sounds are coming from because your computer speakers basically treat it all the same. So the sounds are kind of overlaying with each other. So a couple things that I've found helpful. First is know where your camera is, who are looking at their screen, because your instinct is to look at faces. And so typically the faces will be a lot lower on the screen. And as you can tell, right, somebody's in submission, when somebody's, lesser, or, somebody like, especially with children, naturally feels like you're talking to them directly. And it keeps from sending other signals that you may not know about. So that's just one you're seeing it do right there. So being backlit is not great. Usually, you also typically don't, like preschool, that if you have something to say, you raise your hand. That's the way that you communicate. What do you do when you're in a classroom space? And so that's having those ground rules, even if they seem really obvious. And usually what I recommend is that depending on what you're using, some video programs come with an option to like raise your hand rules for how your students are going to interact in your class, how they should be interacting with others. That's another thing that surprisingly you need to spell out. Like, is it okay for students to talk to one another? Again, because when you are in a synchronous online learning space, doing video conferencing or something like that, again, those things get taken for granted. And especially when you're in a situation where that feels really unnatural, everybody kind of looks to the professor or the teacher as the kind of central gatekeeper and the central person who's kind of taking care of everything. And so what comes along with that is this feeling of like, can I talk to my classmates? Can I actually interact with them? Is that allowed? Whereas in a classroom, that wouldn't be, something you would ask. In an online space, that suddenly becomes a really big question. And so again, just having those ground rules set out so that people know how they can interact with each other, and how they can interact with you, what the rules are around that engagement. All of that is really, really important. So those are kind of the main considerations you want. Obviously, if you can be in a space that's really sound deadened, that's really helpful. Something where you're not getting sound bouncing off the wall. That's really helpful. Being in a place where you're generally not going to have people interrupting you. That's also really background. It's probably my kids who are, making noise and doing things. But generally, this is kind of a soundproof room, which is helpful. So, so yeah, like I said, as you're jumping in, if you can just type in the chat that you're here. If you have any questions, throw them in there. That'll be really helpful, just so I get a sense of if there's anything. Again, I'm going to be doing this till about 7:30, so going to do this for about 20 more minutes. Hopefully the Flipgrid video that I did earlier this week was helpful. I'm planning on doing one around Canvas as well, because I think that's another tool that can be used at a lot of different age levels, that have a lot of different capabilities and things to let you kind of set up a virtual classroom space. It's a little bit more limited in terms of what it can do, but but Google's been building out that feature set. So it's been a while actually since I've jumped in there. So I might try to refamiliarize myself with that and do a video on that as well. I'm also thinking about potentially moving some of the things that I was going to do as video and doing them more in podcast form. And this is also something that's really helpful to know. Doing video is really hard and a lot of effort. Even for something that's like 5 to 10 minutes long, it can take, if you really, and I'll say it this way, if you want it to look really polished and you want it to look really professional, it takes a lot of effort to do that. And so for me, just with the time that I have trying to balance work and kids and all of that, and I still want to be able to do this, doing things audio can be really helpful. And so that's another tip that I would say. Think about what you're wanting to deliver to your students and figure out what the best way is for them to do that. It's a little bit different with kids and adults. It may, what I generally say is that if what you're trying to present allows your students to engage with that material in more places, it also allows you to do things a little bit longer. So in general, longer videos, it really depends on the space and it really depends on the topic, but in general, people want to interact with shorter videos. And again, it varies. When I was working at a graduate school, we really wanted to try to keep things like 5 to 10 minutes. Even 10 minutes was pushing it. That was a long time. That's also because it was usually what we were dealing with were really dense subjects. And believe it or not, it takes a lot of mental strain just to be able to focus and concentrate and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Ingest and digest that information. Process that information. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. And so shorter videos were helpful because you could deal with more specific topics and you kind of allow students to pace themselves to what they need to do. If you have something that's not quite as dense or something that needs more explanation, you can go longer than that. But in any case, videos tend to not get the same type of length in viewing that audio does. You can get away with a half hour of audio and usually be okay. So that's a big thing. The other thing with audio, and I want to talk about this a little bit more, I mentioned it already, it allows your students to interact with the material in more places. So one thing that you get out of psychology, your memory tends to be cued off of your senses. And it's the reason why when you smell things, it brings back memories. It's why when you lose something, it's good to retrace your steps because it actually kicks into gear all these cues that your mind was getting. Is retention, that's actually terrible advice because it means you're only going to be able to remember that in very, location specific things. And that's not to say you can't bring it up elsewhere. It just means you're putting your mind through more strain to kind of bring it up. So the more that you can have that information kind of tagged to sort of be travel with that information, the better. Now, obviously, this is a weird time to be doing that because a lot of people are sheltered in place and not going out as much. But all that to say, when you do audio, it is easier to travel with it. You can exercise with it, even different activities that you're doing in the house. So if you are exercising, if you're taking a walk, if you need to drive somewhere, and obviously that would be more for adult learners, but even for kids, like being able to throw on a lesson in the car, much easier to do if it's an audio as opposed to video. So that was a lot to say. Do that as audio. It's going to be easier to produce. It's going to be more portable for your students, and you're going to be able to get away with longer content. If you are going to do video, make sure that it's because there's something visually you need to show. So whether that might be math, if you need to like visually show how a process is done, anything fine arts related, going to be better in a video format, most likely. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. And yeah. The biggest importance you're going to have with that is if you want to have the social connection with your students. And that's a really important component. I don't want to downplay that. Like, it really is important to have the social connection with your students. But for things like, exercises they might be doing or like in a video that you've pre-recorded, or something that exists on another website, something like Khan Academy, or other resources that are available. Having your students do those and do some exercises first, and saving your synchronous session for when people have questions about those topics. That might be a better way to go in trying to think about how to structure a class that you're needing to move online. Using prefab resources that are available. Again, Khan Academy is a great one. That's going to have a lot of subjects that you can go over. And I know they've been doing a lot of work, especially as people have been ramping up with more people being sheltered in place. But even what you might be able to find on YouTube, again, giving your students a little bit more agency in the process and letting them kind of go through things on their own. One of the great things about videos, you can rewind it. So obviously in this live session, you're not going to be able to rewind me right now. Something you don't understand, you can just rewind me and watch it over and over again. When you're learning a new topic, that can often be really, really helpful. And so learning how to do those things, some practice exercises to do. Again, there's going to be resources out there. I believe Khan Academy has like quizzes and things that they can do. This video is not brought to you by Khan Academy, as much as it might sound like it is. But again, saving the synchronous sessions, which are going to be a lot more effort for time, especially don't necessarily need to be polished. One of the things I think a lot of teachers fear when they go into online education is like, oh, well, robots are going to take over my job. And, you know, when I had to talk to faculty about that, one of the things that I would say to them is like, look, you are actually the most important part of what's happening in that classroom. Because it's not, you know, yes, there is getting the information across, but there's also like helping students answer questions, knowing what the pitfalls are, knowing what the common issues are that come up. And really what students are looking for, I can say this at the higher ed level, and I think it's true at the K through 12 level too, what most students are looking for is expertise from the people. But even then, I think for the most part, most teachers, when they teach, they're being looked on as what is the expertise that you have, or what elementary school, middle school, high school, and college and beyond. And most of them are the ones who put their expertise into practice and tried to give a different perspective, or like, it's like, okay, here's how the textbook teaches you, but here's a shortcut, or here's an easier way to do it that I can speak from my expertise and talk about. That's what students are really looking for out of their teachers, and I think that's the thing that is really hard, that can't be replaced by like AI or robot or automation or things like that. Educational videos, it's not that important to be super polished. I don't think that means that you need to be unprofessional, or that, like, you know, anything goes, and, you know, like if I got up and walked out of the room and came back in, that would somehow be okay for a video. Like, there's a limit to it. But things like verbal static, you know, saying ums and uhs and those things, like that doesn't need to be perfect. And if you need to pause and think about something, or you're like, oh, what was that thing that I was going to talk about? Like, leaving that in the video can actually be okay. Now, if you have a really long pause, you know, edit that out. But and it's hard to give like hard and fast rules on how to do that really well. But I think there is a balance in having teachers show their human side when they're instructing, and having that come across in the video. What it does is it lends authenticity to that person. I think that's really true at the higher ed level. I think that's also true at the K through 12 level. It's really just about like, hey, I'm human too. I don't do everything perfectly, but I do have expertise in this area, and I do have something to share. And so where you would draw the line, what you want to avoid are things that are distracting. And so, you know, if I was going back, like when I edit my videos, I take out some of the verbal static, because if you're hearing me say every other word, it gets annoying really fast, and you start to focus on that, like, oh, he said again. So those types of things you want to might be better to edit out. Also, things where you go really off the rails, or there's a really long pause, or you have to leave the room or something like that. Those are things too that you'd want to edit out. But for the most part, the more authentic your video can be, where people are just seeing you as you are, I think the better it comes across in video. And I think there are some topics where it's maybe better to have it more polished. So if you're talking about something